Hello everyone out there on the internet. This is going to be a response video to a video that Mr. Beat put out on why the Electoral College is terrible. And I just felt in the interest of fairness that we need to hear from both sides on this issue. Let me just say off the bat, I don't put out videos on YouTube very often, and I think this is probably the second response video I've made ever. I've been on YouTube for 16 years. This video may get pretty harsh, but I just want to say at the outset, I have nothing against Mr. Beat. This is nothing personal. I watch his videos. I like most of them. So this is nothing personal. I am actually a fan of his channel and a subscriber. But when I saw this video, it just made my blood boil so much that I simply can't let it go. I'd be willing to bet that in 2016, if Donald Trump won the popular vote and Hillary Clinton won the Electoral College, I'm willing to bet that 90%, at least, of these Electoral College bashing videos would never have been made. So let's go ahead and get started.
This video is about how the Electoral College works. Okay, scratch that. No, this video is about how the Electoral College is horrible. Yeah, it's one of my rare opinion videos, and longtime viewers of the channel already know how much I hate the Electoral College.
Well, I'm not a long-time viewer, but again, I'm glad he at least states it's an opinion video, but again, the tone of the rest of the video doesn't really play that out. Again, you're supposedly an authority. You're a teacher. You teach history. People are going to take you seriously when you say stuff like this, so I think you need to emphasize that a little more often.
On Election Day, tens of millions of Americans go to a voting booth and cast their ballots for president and vice president, except that they're not really casting their ballots for president and vice president. What counts in the Electoral College are the votes of the 538 electors.
It's not like the vote goes in, it goes to some national database, and that's it. States have to certify the elections. State legislatures have to appoint these electors. So having the electors gives us this extra level of insulation so that we can examine the process and make sure that the thing is fair. Yeah, I know, I shouldn't have talked about 2020, but, I mean, look, that's what it's there for. Can't ignore that.
Now, these electors usually look at who the majority of their state voted for and vote with them, but still, they could vote for whoever they want. When this happens, they are called faithless electors, meaning they cast their vote for someone other than who the majority of their state voted for. This has happened 167 times in American history and 10 times in the 2016 election.
First of all, faithless electors are so rare, they have never decided an election, so it's kind of a red herring to even bring them up. Even the Democrats in 2016 tried to get the Republican electors to vote against Trump, and it failed. It failed miserably. But the inclusion of electors is crucial for maintaining state control of our elections. That is one of the big points. The Electoral College compartmentalizes the 51 elections so that it's harder to cheat. It's harder to, if you're going to cheat, you got to manipulate just the right votes in just the right places. You can't just run up the score in California and claim victory, because the damage that cheating in California could do is limited only to those 55 electoral votes. It doesn't spill out into other states. But the electors do serve a purpose, and to bring that as your number one argument, I think is really not getting off to a good start, in my opinion.
So, hypothetically, let's say there are 10 candidates on the ballot running for president, and their support is fairly evenly distributed. The winning candidate could squeak by with 11% of the popular votes and win the state. So already, just by giving you the definition of the Electoral College, I'm hoping you already realize how terrible it is, but in case...
Whoa, that's a little bit of hubris there. Oh, by the way, this 11% winner example... Let me point out, that's independent of whether the Electoral College exists or not. This could hold at any statewide election, any local election, any congressional election, any place where you have plurality voting. And I agree. He's going to talk in a moment about the instant runoff. And I agree, that's probably a better system. But again, that's apples and oranges. It's not, has nothing to do. You can have ranked choice voting within a state and still have that state in an electoral college. The two of them are not mutually exclusive. And those other 89% in California, whatever, in this situation that you're talking about, those other 89% who voted for the losing candidate, well, they're just as represented, and of course all of their votes count. So honestly, I think this is a rather absurd argument. We're talking about an edge case. Yes, what if someone wins a state with 11% of the vote? What if a candidate wins the national election with 23% of the popular vote? These things can happen, but they're absurdly edge cases, and again, they don't depend on whether the Electoral College is there or not. They're just as likely to happen.
If you haven't, let me elaborate. First of all, it's really undemocratic.
Oh, okay, undemocratic. This is the crux of the argument against the Electoral College, right? It's undemocratic. Yes. like they fooled. No, that's by design. The United States has never been a democracy.
The United States has never been a democracy. He's so bold with that statement, but I cringe every time I hear it. It's so...
I'm cringing with this video so far.
So utterly wrong. Yes, we have democracy. It's called voting.
Oh, come on. Just because we vote on things does not make us a democracy. Now, Beat and the Puppet are both right in some sense. We're a democratic republic, which means we democratically elect people who represent us in Washington. By the way, just as an aside, I'm wondering, do Canada and the United Kingdom elect their prime minister by a national popular vote? No. Those countries have electoral colleges too. They're called parliaments. And all major parties in the United States continue to use a primary convention system to choose their nominee. So I would, if you're the Democrat Party and you want to eliminate the Electoral College, let me present this challenge to you. Are you willing to completely give up your primary system, your conventions, have one day just simply elect your party's nominee by national popular vote? Are you willing to do that? I think I just heard crickets. Yeah. So I didn't think so. In fact, in the most recent Canadian election, Justin Trudeau's party lost that popular vote. You didn't hear any complaints there. The Liberal Party, or the Liberal, I think it's Liberal Party, the Liberal Party won the, not really electoral vote, but they won a plurality of seats even though they lost the popular vote. 34% to 33%. What hypocrites we have here. This just proves this is merely a partisan issue and nothing more. Again, Democrats mostly supported the Electoral College when they thought that the blue wall would prevent Republican victories. They only hate it when their candidate loses. And most of the opposition I see to the Electoral College is based purely on knee-jerk partisanship. They have no idea what the Electoral College is. They have no idea what its foundings were, because we don't teach proper history and civics in our schools anymore. We barely taught it when I was in school, but you never heard Electoral College bashing like you do today.
Americans do it every 2 years. Okay, if you claim that we don't have democracy, then why bother even having elections? What is the point?
We live in a republic.
We live in a republic. In other words, we have a federalist system. We elect democratically within that federalist system, but it's still a republic. Again, the fact that we vote does not mean we're not a democracy. We rule through representation within a federalist system where we have separation of powers between the state and federal government. So just a little history lesson here. When the United States first declared independence, we were 13 separate states. We may as well have been 13 separate countries. That was the ultimate states' rights. There was no powerful central government at all. So when the Constitution was written and ratified, you had 13 states making a bargain. They said, okay, we realize we can't have 13 states each with our own currency, our own military, our own standards of weights and measures. We need to give some powers to a federal government. So they very reluctantly ceded some of their powers in Article 1, Section 8 to the federal government in exchange for the recognition that they would have states' rights. And the president is elected by states. The president is not elected by people. This is the way it's always been. And to say, well, my vote doesn't count as much is just, it's nonsense. I gotta say, it's just not, one person, one vote has never been a thing. When most of us talk about us not being a democracy, it doesn't mean we don't vote. It means that we don't run our country on just the citizens vote on everything. I mean, if we had to have a national referendum every time we want to pass a law, can you imagine the chaos? That's the type of thing we're talking about. So when we say we're not a democracy, what we mean is that we are a republic where there's a separation of powers, where it's not the states that are subservient to the federal government. It's actually the federal government is supposed to be subservient to the states. That's the way it's supposed to be. States' rights are a thing. States have the right to control their own elections, to control their own election laws, to draw their own district boundaries. That is a right of the state legislatures guaranteed in the Constitution, and that's how we elect presidents. We don't elect presidents by, or do anything else. I mean, we don't pass any laws by a national popular vote. Why would we elect a president by a national popular vote? We need to have that separation so that states are in charge. So making the argument, well, you know, we're not a republic because we vote. Nah, that's not. People in republics vote. That has nothing to do with it.
It's indirect democracy, sure, but it's still freaking democracy.
But the Founding Fathers hated democracy.
Well, of course the Founding Fathers were not a fan of democracy. I mean, several Founding Fathers also thought slavery was okay, and they thought that only
Red herring.
white property-owning males should be the ones to vote. As much of a fan as I am of Benjamin Franklin and George Washington, they were not perfect. And, yeah, the United States didn't become that democratic until years later, when Andrew Jackson became the first president of the, quote, common man in 1820.
Okay, I gotta stop this. Okay, we've got here a red herring, a non sequitur, and a straw man all rolled into one. First of all, most founders were not okay with slavery. I mean, this is the same logic that puts Washington and Jefferson as bad presidents, deserving of having their statues destroyed because they happened to own slaves. So Beat here is basically making an argument that the founders, as if there's some monolithic group, were in favor of bad thing X, and therefore everything else they were in favor of is now up for grabs. Slavery is gone. We don't have slavery anymore. We don't have Jim Crow anymore. Blacks and women and every citizen over the 18 has the right to vote now. So why is he even bringing this up? It's completely misleading. There's no reason. To tie that to Electoral College is just a distraction, in my opinion. And besides, for governments of the 18th century to prevent what they thought of as the, quote, wrong types of people from voting. Yes, they didn't want women voting. They didn't want blacks voting. They didn't want non-property owners voting. Yeah, it's all terrible. But none of that has anything to do with the Electoral College. They could have had these same restrictions with or without an Electoral College. As a matter of fact, they did in state elections and local elections. Many states didn't allow everyone to vote either. So this is not an argument. It's a terrible thing, but A, it's been fixed, and B, it's not an argument against the Electoral College in the first place. We should abolish the Electoral College in 2021 because slavery existed 156 years ago. That makes absolutely no sense.
The Electoral College also gives more power to states with less people in them.
Well, duh. Of course it does. The founders wanted it that way.
I don't care if they did. It's wrong.
If your state has less people, you have more power.
Yeah.
So, yeah, Crowder is okay with one person's vote being worth more than another person's.
Crowder is absolutely right, and it has nothing to do with one person's vote being less than another. Everyone's vote counts the same in terms of electing that state's electors. Everyone's vote in California counts the same because the number of electors are proportional to the population. So this thing about my vote counts less is absurd. It's honestly absurd. And look, and all of this, you know, states could set fair or unfair voting laws completely regardless of whether the Electoral College existed or not. Now, I will grant something here, that in 1788, presidential candidates, you know, were unknown by most of America. So, it's, you know, we didn't have mass media. It's certainly plausible that most Americans, as intelligent, as educated as they were, couldn't really make an informed decision because they just didn't have the information available that we do have today. But is that alone a reason to scrap the Electoral College today? I mean, this is one of many, many reasons. So the fact that we have more information today, okay, yeah, I get it, but you know, that itself is not a reason to scrap it.
Votes. But everyone's vote should count equally.
It does.
I am not better than you, and my vote should not be worth more than yours. But
no one's vote is worth more than anyone else's. This is a complete fabrication. I don't want to get emotional here, but this is a non-argument. This is the most stupid, absurd argument I've seen against the Electoral College. Well, other than it's racist. That's the worst one. But no one's vote is worth what? If you're do Californians fill out a quarter of a ballot? Do they only fill out the little circle a quarter of the way? No, it's ridiculous.
Currently, if you live in Texas, like Steven Crowder does, then my vote is worth more than yours because I live in Kansas. Kansas has 6 electoral votes, or 1 for every 500,000 people. Texas has 38 electoral votes, or 1 for every 763,000.
So what? Determining whose vote is worth more than another's is a fruitless and subjective exercise. We have a one-person, one-vote body. It's the House of Representatives. It was the only constitutionally, under the Constitution, it was the only body that was directly elected by the people and directly answerable to the people. That we have the Senate, who has the interest of the state, and every state there has equal representation. It's a compromise. And the Electoral College, since it's 1 vote per Congress member, that is a reflection of that compromise. Again, if you really wanted to be unfair about it, if you really wanted to give more power to the small states or the rural voters, we would make it 1 vote per state, and that's not the way it is. Texas has 38 electoral votes because it has more people than Kansas does. Now, it's different for the ratio, I understand. But again, what the Electoral College does by making everything in proportion and then adding a couple of votes for each state, it kind of tempers that proportionality a little bit so that the big states and the most urban states don't dominate. Again, one of the original purposes was to prevent the highly populous North from dominating the elections and getting presidents only sympathetic to their needs. And that's why the South generally wanted it. Now, yes, one of those Southern quote-unquote needs was slavery. Slavery was evil, and it's a bad reason for wanting equal representation for the South, but that itself does not make states' rights a bad thing. I'm sick and tired of hearing the arguments, well, when someone mentions states' rights, oh, well, you must be pro-slavery. No, that's absurd. And to say that the Electoral College was designed to give smaller states more power is a gross misstatement. The cities have a population advantage over the rural areas of far greater proportion than the North ever had over the South in 1788. It's not about the peoples themselves. The presidency was never supposed to be 1 person, 1 vote. That's what the House is for, and if we still operated within the bounds of the Constitution, we respected separation of powers, and we didn't have so much usurpation by the executive branch, maybe this wouldn't be as much of an issue. But a national popular vote would almost cement one-party Democrat rule, and that's why the Democrats want it so much. That's the reasoning. Right there, it's all partisan. And rural and urban voters have to have an equal shot at who rules the entire country. Now, so stop saying one person's vote or this person's vote doesn't count as much, because it is just literally not a thing. It's a made-up fabrication. It's a red herring. It was never supposed to be that way. And things like this stem from complete ignorance over what the Electoral College is.
Now, there's a common argument that candidates would only campaign in big cities.
People would be campaigning in the big... Republicans would go to Tarrant County, Texas, Fort Worth, and the suburbs of Houston and Orange County, California. Democrats would go to San Francisco and New York, and a big part of the country would be overlooked.
The big reason for this is because you can't just...
Let's pause on this, because we go through this thing a little too quickly. But it would require other talents and a different kind of merit to establish him in the esteem and confidence of the whole Union, or of so considerable a portion of it as would be necessary to make him a successful candidate for the distinguished office of President of the United States. The Federalist Papers, right from the horse's mouth, and I'm not even a really big fan of Hamilton. I mean, I think he was too much of a centralist, but there you go.
Have people pandering to a few big cities. Let's stop by New York, D.C., Los Angeles, San Francisco, Detroit in the 50s, promise them a bunch of stuff, wrap this up, and go home.
So let's add all the places they mentioned up, just to be generous. That totals 25.8 million people. The U.S. has 326 million people. Why would candidates only focus on 1/13 of the country?
Okay, now this is very misleading. Let me go back to that frame. This is extremely misleading. And let me just go through a few things here. First of all, again, it's not so much about a president having to appeal to a geographical region. I mean, it is, but having to appeal to the needs of various constituent voters. If a president is elected with almost all the urban vote and then makes regulations that unfairly affect the farming community, is it fair to cut their voice out? Is it fair to make their vote worth less just because there are fewer of them? And by the way, 25.8 million, first of all, 25.8 million is nothing to sneeze at. Okay, let's do a little math that's missing from this slide. Okay, the difference, the margin of popular vote in 2020 was 7.1 million. 2016, 2.9 million. 2012, 5 million. 2008, 9.5 million. 2004, 3 million. Yeah, 25.8 million is starting to look pretty good. As a matter of fact, the last 5 presidential elections had a total, all 5, the total popular margin vote was 27.5 million, just a little bit over this. It was the popular margin averaged about 5.5 million. You're also counting population margins here. You're not counting the total votes cast. These are just total population. You also have to add many more cities in this. He only includes the top 8. Now, according to the Census Bureau, the urbanized plus urban population clusters in the United States total 249 million versus 59 million for the rural population. Actually, the urban population makes up 80.7% of the population. So this is extremely misleading. The rural vote makes up less than 20%. So if those cities, and we could do the math on this, if those cities, those urban areas vote 62% Democrat, that would give them 50% of the popular vote, which means the rural areas, their votes would be worthless now. Their votes would count less because they could vote 100%. Let's say the urban population votes Democrat at 62%. The rural areas could vote 100% Republican and they would still lose. And you're going to get people in government who don't who don't take the needs of rural voters seriously. This is why we need the Electoral College. This is why it is so essential. And this graphic is one of the most misleading ones in the entire video because, again, it's not 1/113th. It's actually 4/5 when you really break down the numbers and don't just include the biggest cities. And when you account for registered voters, not just total population.
13th of the country. And besides, under the Electoral College, they only focus on swing states, or states that are too close to predict who will win there based on polls. Sure, swing states can change, but Americans who don't live in a swing state often feel their voice is not heard.
Wyoming.
Well, that's pretty subjective, I think. Again, your voice is heard. You elect senators. You elect representatives. You participate in... look, swing states change more often than you think. In 2000 election, everyone wants to talk about Florida. Well, if George W. Bush had not flipped West Virginia, he still would have lost. West Virginia was a solid blue state at that time, and George Bush flipped West Virginia in all 4 of their electoral votes, and that made the difference. Not Florida. Well, Florida was part of it. So these things can change. You're acting like if it's not a swing state, it has no chance of being flipped at all, and that's just simply not the case. Everyone has an equal chance at choosing their state's electors. Everyone has an equal chance at flipping that state.
They can't have their vote drowned out by people who are corralled in the big cities.
Wyoming can't have their vote
Oh, nice. Yeah, nice tinfoil hat. Oh, this is really objective video, isn't it?
drowned out by people who are corralled into the big cities? First of all, people are not corralled into the big cities. They choose to live there for various reasons. Second, votes are not, quote, drowned out. Votes are counted the same in Wyoming as they are in Los Angeles. There's just a lot more votes in Los Angeles.
Okay, so there's a few problems here. First of all, you're getting hung up on definitions. Whether people, corralled was not a good choice of words, but look, whether people live in big cities by choice is completely irrelevant. The fact is they live in big cities. Okay, the point the Crowder is making here is that the interests of the voters in Wyoming and other rural states, as I explained a few minutes ago, those interests don't get drowned out because they get easily outvoted by the big cities. The Electoral College balances that out somewhat, not completely. And again, I have to say over and over again, all votes are not supposed to be quote-unquote equal in POTUS elections. That's not how it was designed, and for good reasons. And deciding which vote is more equal than anyone else's, you could talk about that all day. Again, it's fruitless. It's highly subjective. And by the way, Beat says something else very interesting here. He said some states have their votes count less if they're not in swing states. But at the same time, you say that no vote is drowned out no matter which state you live in. Well, that's a little inconsistent, don't you think?
State candidates only focus their campaigns to the top 100 most populated metro areas in the country. Well, those cities all have...
Well, you just listed the top 8. 8, not 100.
Have media companies that broadcast to the surrounding rural areas. They would not...
Oh, dear God. Okay, look, again, this is completely irrelevant. We're not talking about information. Yes, the media's broadcast to the rural areas, and we have internet and all that stuff. Media broadcasts aren't the issue. Neither is internet access. It's not about information. It's about the interests of those rural areas. They can get all the broadcasts. It's all the broadcasts from the cities they want. That's not the point at all. Again, I think Beat is trying to distract us here. He's trying to do a little rope-a-dope, bringing up things that are completely irrelevant, or even if they are relevant, have nothing to do with the Electoral College. What you have, it's about the interest of the rural areas not being drowned out by the urban. And what you have here is a subjective definition of democracy. We're talking about democracy in the purest sense, about the question of can 51% of the population make decisions for the other 49%? And what decision is more important than who's going to lead our country?
The Electoral College makes it so candidates who represent the minority often get elected. As CGP Gray pointed out, a candidate...
Yeah, that's kind of the point, isn't it? And look, again, it's supposed to balance things out. That's the whole point. I don't care what CGP Gray says. He's wrong.
A candidate who gets just 22% of the popular vote can be elected president in the Electoral College.
Yes, but that is, again, well, is indefensible. That's your opinion. But is any of this exclusive to the Electoral College? I mean, this can happen just as easily in a first-past-the-post system. This can happen in plurality voting. It can happen in a national popular vote. This is just as likely to have. You can have someone, if you have 5 people running, yes, you can have someone winning with 22% of the popular vote. This is not a property of the Electoral College here that we're talking about.
And some Electoral College supporters say that it protects our two-party system. Without the Electoral College, we'd have too many choices for president? Too many choices for president? That sounds horrifying. I hate choices. I'd rather just have 2 crappy candidates.
But people can't handle more than 2 candidates. They'd have to research the candidates.
I don't know why but I've never heard anyone bring up that argument on either side. Here we go. All right, so let me just say one thing. I do agree with this. He brings up the ranked choice voting, and let me just say I am on board with that. I think we should have the ranked choice voting, but again, you can have ranked choice voting within a state and still have the Electoral College system. So this is a non sequitur because it's independent. Whether you have ranked choice voting or not, I mean, would it be more fair if we had a national popular vote with ranked choice voting? Maybe. I don't think we have no reason to necessarily believe that. And by the way, this whole thing, and look, I think we should have more choices too. I don't know why he's making this counter argument that people don't want choices. Of course people want choices. Choices are a good thing. I mean, you're basically putting words into our mouths that we don't want choices. I hate the 2-party system. I would abolish all political parties if I could. And if we had more parties, more moderate parties, you could at least keep the Democrats and Republicans more honest, and they couldn't cater to their extreme bases anymore. I get that. But again, you can have a 5-candidate ranked choice voting inside the individual states. And then you could maybe make the electoral votes proportional, or not. Those are things we could talk about, but it's very dishonest to say that if you want the Electoral College, then you want to protect the 2-party system. No. The 2-party system is protected by itself and the federal election laws. It has nothing to do with the Electoral College. How would a national popular vote give us more candidates? Not by itself. I mean, we are in a situation where, yes, okay, if you have a third-party candidate, it's almost impossible for them to win the Electoral College. But you could say the same thing about the popular vote, too. I mean, third-party candidates, even in the popular vote, barely get any more than 5% or so. And if you had a candidate who was capable of getting near a majority, they might win a lot more electoral votes. So, again, it's kind of a non-issue.
Right now, Americans often don't feel like they have a voice due to the Electoral College.
That's a rather subjective opinion. Again, most people don't know what the Electoral College is. They're making these kind of whimsical judgments. And I think if we had more education, true history and civics education in this country, and people actually knew what the Electoral College is, I think you'd see that those numbers be a lot lower.
The Electoral College actually is responsible for lower voter turnout in states that lean either solidly Democratic Party or solidly Republican Party.
Now, these we don't see statistics for. Very interesting.
It seems that I've already changed Crowder's mind.
You haven't changed his mind, and I knew going into this that the chance of you changing my mind was about the same as aliens landing by my front door as I watched this video. But I've got an open mind. I watch it anyway.
Representative republic. We should have terms. We should be changing these politicians regularly.
Exactly. It's called voting. It's called democracy.
Yes, and people vote in a republic. Whether people vote or not, again, is irrelevant. Unless it's a dictatorship or a monarchy, you're going to have voting.
Let's get out that...
By the way, you have voting you have voting in China, you have voting in Cuba, you have voting in Venezuela for all the good that does.
Other arguments fans of the Electoral College often bring up, that's how the Founding Fathers designed it. They feared a democracy and wanted a safeguard. Well, actually, no. Several of the founders wanted direct elections.
Oh boy, this guy's a teacher. I'm sorry, this is nothing personal, but this is an absurd argument. First of all, look, are you really implying that when we say the founders wanted, that we're referring to each and every signee as if they're all alike? The founders were not a monolith, okay? The founders as a whole ratified the Constitution that had the Electoral College. Okay, they made that decision as a group. Of course there were probably some people who didn't want it that way. That's not the point. You're implying that the founders are some big monolithic group, and that's just not the case. Very dishonest.
The Electoral College was a compromise to make those folks happy. And
yes, it was a compromise. That's the whole point. A compromise between big and small, between urban and rural. It was a compromise. It is a compromise between, pure democracy and just having every state decide without popular choice. And one that's worked pretty well, if I might say so.
And again, if they did design it that way, much of the other stuff they designed has since been changed.
Oh, okay. Well, things are different now. That's such a cop-out. Things have changed. It's old. It's outdated. Well, I've made my point earlier that I think it's far from outdated. It's more necessary than it ever was. But that's just a cop-out. Well, things are different now, so we need to scrap the Electoral College because it's, old and stuff. Yeah. You know what else is old? The Bible. That's just a bunch of fairy stories written thousands of years ago. Why do we still follow the Bible? Really? Why don't we throw the Bible out? They don't have an electoral college in the UK. Actually, they do. It's called Parliament. But they do have a monarchy. That monarchy is 2,000 years old. Maybe we should get rid of the monarchy. But they love it. So just because something is old doesn't mean you get rid of it. You have to come up with a reasoning. Not just that it's old, but if you're going to say times have changed, you have to illustrate what about those changing times necessitates the elimination, the changing of the DNA of our country's government. The Constitution is not supposed to be changed for light and transient reason. That's why it's so difficult. It's supposed to be that way. If the electoral look, if it was so obvious that the Electoral College was horrible, if you really truly had 80% of the country being against it, it should be easy to eliminate, right? You shouldn't have any problem eliminating it through a constitutional amendment, and yet that hasn't been done, and in my opinion never will be done. Why? Because it only takes 13 states to kill an amendment. And, I could rattle off probably, I'm not going to try, but I can think of at least 13 states that would say absolutely no, we're not signing away our sovereignty like that. So this whole thing is kind of fruitless.
Forces a presidential candidate to have appeal across different regions. No region, south, northeast, etc., has enough electoral votes to elect a president.
Okay, this is technically true. Maybe in 1788 that might have been true. Okay, but again, as I said, it's not necessarily about geographical regions. It's about demographics. And it depends how you define region. As I've said before, it has less to do with geographical region like it did in 1788. It's more about urban versus rural, and that's something that seems to continue to fall on deaf ears. So yes, that much has changed. It's no longer necessarily a big state, small state. It's not a north state, south state. But because the rural-urban divide is a much higher disproportion than the regional disproportions were when the Constitution was founded, that tells me it's needed now more than ever. And on top of that, you have the presidency has been slowly usurping power over the past 100 years. We live in this age of pen and phone legislature. So yes, the president is more powerful than ever, and the divide, we have the more polarization than ever, especially between urban centers and rural areas. If you go to a national popular vote, the rural areas and the rural interests, all those farmers in Kansas, they're just going to get run over. They will have no place to go, nowhere to turn, because we're going to be just completely dominated by urban candidates, who are, of course, mainly Democrats, and who they don't care about the rural vote, and they don't even have to. In my state of Washington, okay, our state is basically ruled by Seattle. King County has 40% of our population. They have almost half of our Senate seats. Yet the huge eastern two-thirds is rural and Republican, and we basically get no choice at all. We can't outvote them. We can't outvote them in the population. We can't outvote them in the Senate. Basically, the entire state, which is mostly rural, is ruled by a few counties in the urban area. In fact, I wouldn't even argue we need state-based electoral colleges, if anything.
Unquote. But that argument is weak, because large states would get more attention without the Electoral College as well.
That's true, but again, it's mainly urban versus rural. You can have a large state that doesn't have a lot of urban areas, it's just big in land area. So again, we're not really making the claim that it's a large state, small state thing anymore. So, yeah, it's not really relevant in this case.
Founding fathers could not have foreseen the changes their country would go through in 250 years.
That's why they gave us an amendment process. And if you want to get rid of the Electoral College, make an amendment to do so, and good luck with that. But again, you're making it's old, therefore we need to remove it. No, I mean, yes, things have changed. And that's why we've amended the Constitution. But again, that's no excuse to get rid of the Electoral College. He seems to be making the argument that, well, it's old, therefore we got to get rid of it. No, that's not an excuse.
The country has become more nationalized culturally. The internet and other mass communications has united the country in unforeseeable ways. The divide
and what's the relevance?
Today remains mostly rural versus urban.
Thank you! Thank you for finally recognizing that.
Today, less than 15% of Americans live in rural areas.
And that's the point. If less than 15% live in rural areas, that 85% can outvote them very easily. And you have one candidate who's going to favor, pro-farmer legislation. The other candidate's going to sink all our tax money into high-speed rails and things that urban people like at the expense of the rural areas. Well, those rural areas are pretty much up a creek. And he's about to say, well, why would we give that much power to rural states? It's not about giving more power to them. It's about evening the playing field. The Electoral College doesn't even completely do that. Now, if we wanted to give more power to the rural states, again, we'd make it one electoral vote per state.
No offense to those living in rural areas, but...
Well, yeah, we've taken no offense. Nothing you've said so far has offended us at all. You basically said our needs don't matter. But other than that, no offense.
Should you have that much leverage over everyone else? No.
It's not about having leverage over everyone else. It's about achieving some sort of equality of leverage.
And what's one of the real reasons why the Electoral College exists? Well, the founders knew that if the popular vote elected the president, the Northerners would domanate elections, and therefore the institution of slavery would be threatened. Why do Americans...
Oh my God. I hate to be the one to point this out, but slavery has been illegal for at least 150 years. So why are you bringing this argument up now? I mean, yeah, okay, I get it. It gave the South more of a voice. The fact that they used that as a way to protect slavery is bad. But again, that doesn't make the Electoral College bad. You're bringing up he's bringing up these red herrings that are irrelevant in the year it was irrelevant in 2018, and just as irrelevant in 2021. So stop bringing up this red herring of slavery. It was bad, it was evil, but it doesn't exist anymore. And so making that an argument for removing the Electoral College today is just absurd.
He threatens. Why do Americans either really defend or really hate the Electoral College? There's no way to know for sure, but...
Actually, there is. Because Republicans defend it because they want to follow the Constitution. And yes, look, it gives them an advantage. We won't lie there. Yeah, I mean, every party wants to give itself an advantage. But again, the Democrats who are against it, and they're against it simply because they're bitter about 2016. That's really what it comes down to. And they're the ones arguing for the change. So really, you could argue that the Democrats want to change it to give themselves an advantage. That's really what's happening here. And again, I guarantee, if the 2016 situation were reversed, if Clinton had won the Electoral College and Donald Trump the popular vote, videos like this would not even have been made.
there is one giant clue. Look at the political leanings of those who support it. They tend to be folks who like Republicans. The ones who usually hate it, those who tend to like Democrats.
Because they lose more often with it. That's all it is.
Ain't no George W. Bush supporter in 2000 saying he hates the Electoral College. And there ain't no Al Gore supporter in 2000 saying he loves it.
And that just proves that this is a partisan issue. You've made the case that this has nothing to do with all these excuses about that you've been bringing up. It's a partisan issue, pure and simple.
Same goes with 2016. The most vocal supporters of the Electoral College were Trump supporters, and the most vocal opponents were Clinton supporters. But
You're making my point for me there.
here's another example of how the minority actually has the power in the country. Poll after poll reveals that only 30% are okay with the Electoral College.
Yeah, and 70% oppose the Electoral College. The other 30% actually know what it is. And I'd like to see this statistic, but I would say even if it's true, they're all watching videos like this. And it taints their opinion. They're not learning about it. We don't teach history. We don't, proper history anyway. We don't teach proper civics. They don't know what the Electoral College is. They hear these paper-thin arguments about, well, my vote's worth less, and, oh, they just wanted slavery, and they believe it. These are impressionable kids, and that's why they believe these things. And if anything, I would say, if this statistic is true, it only underscores the reason for that, to me, is an argument for the Electoral College, not against it, because we don't rule by a democracy. When Crowder and people like him say we're not a democracy, that's what we mean. We don't let 70% of the population, we don't let 90% of the population, or 99% of the population make whimsical, knee-jerk decisions for the rest of us. If you have a reason to change the Constitution, it better be a damn good one. And I might say that if this support is really as much as you say, getting that constitutional amendment shouldn't be a problem. And yet I haven't even seen a modern attempt to do it. They want to do this national popular vote compact, the enemies of the Electoral College, which of course is in itself unconstitutional because states cannot make treaties with one another. But I digress.
70% are against it.
Minority? Better than a majority? What about mob rule?
Well, the minority can be just as corrupt as the mob.
Well, that's true, and most often a lot of times the minority is the mob, but the puppet does have a point there.
Anyway, more than 700 proposals have been introduced in Congress to either reform or get rid of the Electoral College. There have been...
And they've almost entirely failed, which seems kind of strange if that 70% statistic is true, don't you think? I mean, the fact that none of those have gained any ground, that kind of tells me all I need to know. And I think most of the people who oppose the Electoral College simply do so, I'm going to say it, out of ignorance. They don't know what it is. They don't know about our history. They don't know about our civics. They think the United States is a democracy, and I mean like a pure democracy, where the people have to rule. No, the people don't rule. They rule through their representatives, and they rule through their states. That's the way it's supposed to be.
More proposals for constitutional amendments on changing it than any other subject. A big reason why I am making this video now is because we are just about as far away from a presidential election here in the States as we can get. This should not be a partisan issue. This is a common sense issue. The Electoral College is horrible.
But it's not. Oh, so common sense. Common sense, in other words, my opinion, says the Electoral College is horrible. I mean, this is obviously a very... Look, you have a right to make an opinion video, although you haven't used the word opinion in a while. You're really coming off as an authority here. But it is a partisan issue. I mean, you explained it not more than a minute ago. The Democrats loved the Electoral College when they thought the blue wall could keep Republicans out. And again, we wouldn't be hearing about this at all if 2016 were reversed.
Anyway, remember how at the beginning of the video I told you that Kansas has around 3 million people? Well, in the last presidential election, the candidate who won the election had 3 million less votes than the candidate who won the popular vote. Let's introduce democracy to the United States.
Well, again, we're not a democracy. And again, look, if Donald Trump, if we had a popular vote in 2016, the campaigns would have done this very differently. It's very possible Trump would have won the popular vote if those were the rules. But to say that, oh, well, but Hillary had more popular votes. You know, this is like if you lose a football game 21-20 and say, no, we should have won because we had more yards. But no, you know, you both play if the game were about who gained the most yards, then the winning team would not have run the clock out at the end. They'd continue to throw bombs. They'd continue to try to throw touchdowns. They'd run up that yardage. But that's not how it works. Basically, you're complaining that what this comes down to is the Democrats don't like the Electoral College because they lost in 2016, and now they want to change the rules after the game, complaining it's not fair. Why are the rules unfair? Because we lost. This whole argument that but Clinton got more votes is completely and utterly irrelevant.
Let's end minority rule. Let's fix the horrible Electoral College.
And let's hope it never happens. And it never will, for many reasons which I've stated already. Wow, this was much longer than I intended. Probably going to cut this down a lot, but hey, there's a lot to unpack here. And, you know, look, I got a little heated during this video, and this is nothing personal, obviously. I have a great amount of respect for Mr. Beat. I just think he's just dead wrong with these arguments. I mean, you know, you can call it an opinion video all you want, but there's a big air of authority to it, and, you know, he brings up arguments that have nothing to do with whether we have Electoral College or not. He brings up arguments that are very subjective. And so I'm glad he at least recognizes that this is an opinion video, but, you know, I made this, and I very rarely make any YouTube videos at all, but my blood was boiling so much during this video that I just had to say something. I felt, you know, we need to get the other side out there because, you know, when that's 70% or 80%, well, it's all from watching videos like this. People aren't getting both sides of the story. And I think if people actually knew what the Electoral College was, if we taught proper history and proper civics, I think that 70% number would come down a lot, assuming it's even real. I'd like to see what the source was for that. Anyway, thanks for putting up with this long, long video. I don't really do these very often because they take a long time. And I'm not sure if the audience is there for it, and, you know, I don't have a whole lot of time. But if you like this video, whether you agree with me or not, you want to see more of these, let me know in the comments. Couldn't hurt. Can't guarantee anything. I'm not a professional YouTuber. I'm not even an amateur YouTuber. But, you know, like and subscribe and all that jazz. And, again, thanks for watching.